Hey Cactus crew, how you going? Thanks for tuning in, and if you're new here, hi, I'm Bill. Welcome to my channel. Every Monday I delve into the Without a Crystal Ball archives and I bring you one of Katie's old articles or blog posts. I'm open to suggestions as well. If you have an article in mind and you want me to read it, tag me in the comments below at Cactus Bill. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at It's Crystal Bill. Give this video a like, share, please consider subscribing, and remember that everything I say is my own opinion. I've done my research. There's links below. Most children that are born premature are on the spectrum. Most children that have hydrocephalus are on the spectrum. He is on the spectrum regardless if Katie writes that he's misdiagnosed or not. There's videos, I'll link below. Parenting with the Paulsons is a good playlist. You see him interact with his mum, his behavior. I really do encourage you to go and figure it out for yourself. Go do your research, find the answers so that you can decipher the truth from the bullshit. There's so much bullshit out there now, so much exaggeration on stories told by Katie, people elaborating, getting in on how she exaggerates stuff. Why does she exaggerate stuff? For shock value, to bring you in the drama. This is a real life story. So if you want the facts, or do you want choose your own adventure, basically, I don't want the story. I want the facts. I want to fully understand what's going on. I don't want to be told by someone else what's going on. I want to go and figure it out for myself. Medical journals, like articles, it can be cited, is what I am referencing. Because I've done the hard yakka. I've studied the brains of infancy from 0 to 3. I know how a child's brain develops after trauma. I'm very aware of body language. It's my passion. I prefer it, So on May 16, 2017, how being social delayed my son's autism diagnosis. My son and I sat in a waiting room at a clinic as we waiting for test results. I could feel my heart beating outside of my chest. My hands were sweaty and I couldn't stop fidgeting. He was impatient, making sounds of an engine and throwing a dump truck on and off a chair. People around us didn't seem to notice my agitation, and I hope they weren't bothered by a child that only knows 2 decibels, loud and louder. Finally, after waiting about half an hour, we were called back to the room we had just come from. There were 4 chairs, and they were filled with a mental health counsellor, a licensed psychologist, and an administrator observing for the clinic. I could feel my hands sweating, and I was nervous because I just wanted answers. My son was not cooperating. He was clingy, climbing on me and demanding to play. We moved to the room that adjoined the conference room, as it had toys for him. I took my seat next to a slide and a beanbag, and my son started fidgeting with toy cars, Play-Doh, and jumping on and off the slide. The psychologist started first, and I can tell you I was barely listening. I heard him say a few things about his motor skills being at age appropriate, and then mentioned his language and cognition was on pace with his age. My heart sank because I thought this meant they were going to tell us that nothing was wrong. My legs started to bounce up and down, and I looked at them with a puzzled look. I truly thought that was the end of the conversation. I said, "Okay." Then the woman paused and looked at me and said, "Oh, we have more though. This is just the initial findings of his development." My mind came back to the room and I thought to myself, this is where they're going to tell me. The male psychologist looked at me and said, "We want you to know, we see all the things you have said about regarding your son. We see his inability to do many things without prompting, and it is clear he doesn't use body gestures in nonverbal communication, and he doesn't seem to understand body language. This, coupled with his hyper and hyposensitivity to stimuli and his need for routine and resistance to change, is consistent with." There was a long pause on his end. I stared at him and looked at him with eyes begging to tell me. Finally, he started again. "Your son has autism spectrum disorder." I don't know if a doctor would deliver it that way. I'm pretty sure most psychologists would say, "Your son is on the spectrum." But this is Katie's story. Have you noticed? It's not V's story. This is Katie's story. This is Katie trying to make her son fit the diagnosis. Rather than the diagnosis fitting her son, she's out to get the diagnosis that will make her son have the permanent disability that makes him dependent on her. Autism, where he falls on the spectrum, like permanent disability that hinders him from making his own income, being independent, having his own job, being able to live alone? Or is he so low functioning that he needs a carer, that he needs to have guardianship? She wants the disorder that is going to make him dependent on her. It's like she's won the lottery, dismissing every other diagnosis. She's now an autism mum. Look at me, my child's autistic, guys. That's why he melts down. That's why he's not social. That's why he can't eat. That's why his language was delayed. Well, no, not really. Another reason could quite possibly be his parents neglect him. His parents do not have the patience to parent. They don't have the passion. They don't care enough. Their son is not their priority. A nutshell background on my passion for brain development. I studied the development of a child's brain from 0 to 3. It's so crucial. The child's brain is a sponge. You can teach a child a second language in that time. That's where a child is going to pick up the most. It's the basis, the core to everything else that they learn. If your child is being neglected in that first 0 to 3 years, it's going to impact their language. It's going to impact their social. It's going to impact so much. Katie is unaware of what her behavior, her actions, how she's harmed her child. If we think back, 3 months old was when he had pediatric traumatic brain injury. That's when he got the pen hypopituitarism diagnosis. The damage to the pituitary gland was irreversible. That is when he accumulated with hydrocephalus and left untreated. His brain was being damaged because Katie totally disregarded the size of her child's head growing, the pressure, what that was doing to her child. Why was her child so lethargic, so tired all the time, always had ear infections? Could it be that the pressure of the ventricles in the brain that were being filled up by cerebral fluid were pushing back parts of his brain? Anything that he learned, he was not able to retain that information. He was not able to build upon the information that he already learned. He was not able to learn. Plus, he wasn't getting the outside stimuli that he should have been getting from his parents because they were so deep in their own fucking alcoholism. Katie writes about it. When I was on the verge of being an alcoholic, that is in a playlist linked below with every other article I've read. Here is the study, and what does it have to say? It's of early neglect on cognitive, language, and behavioral functioning in childhood. Low stimulation environments and inconsistent parenting. Lack of rules, failure to monitor child, inconsistent punishment and reward. Pavlov's dogs. Nah, not going on here. Common in both physical neglect environments and orphanage settings. If you don't know your place in the world because you are neglected or deprived of any human interaction, it affects the brain development. And V's brain would have developed very differently because he did not have this stimuli, not only from his parents, but from other babies, other children. Katie, you have harmed your child. Every single video, every single photo that I have seen, it's always a mobile, a screen between you and your child. You never, ever sit down and interact with him. You never show him. Back to the feeding, putting the food on the tray of the high chair, expecting him to eat. But how would he know when he's never seen you do it? He's never seen you and Toad be social. He's never watched you and Toad eat. He doesn't know what to do. He's only 2. He shouldn't be eating that, you know? You're like, oh, he must have a feeding disorder. Why isn't he eating? Because his mother is not hands-on. Katie, the feeding therapist, the speech therapist, the physical therapist, they all had an issue with you. They all gave you homework and you didn't do it. And then when they called you out on it, you stopped taking him. It's not about you. This is not about you, but you've made it about you. And so you're driving the story. It's Katie's show. What about your son who has to put up with the damage that you've caused him? As children develop, the neurocognitive deficits associated with adverse early life events can impair functioning and increase the vulnerability for social and behavioral difficulties. Neglect is the type of maltreatment most strongly associated with delays in expressive, receptive, and overall language development. Slow language development plays a role in behavioral difficulties across the lifespan, with approximately 70% of children with language impairments exhibiting comorbid behavior problems. Children who are unable to communicate effectively may not have the necessary skills to negotiate or resolve conflict and may have difficulties understanding and relating to others. Children with a history of neglect are at risk for impaired language development if they are not provided the complex linguistic input and personal interactions necessary for optimal development of language skills. Studies have shown that the quality of mother-child interactions help predict cognitive and linguistic outcomes in preschool-aged children of high social risk mothers. Interpersonal interaction is necessary for the acquisition of early language, and these interactions may be limited for children that have experienced physical or emotional neglect. Immediately, my head fell backward and tears flew down my face. I started crying and I looked at them and I said, "So I'm not crazy? There really are differences? This really is autism?" I was relieved and yet so puzzled at the same time. He looked at me and said, "No, you're not crazy. He has autism." After that, I really don't remember much. It was a blur of charts and papers. There was talk about what to do next, therapy, follow-up course, and treatment plans. We left the clinic in a haze. I was happy to have answers, but I left with so many questions. The diagnosis was a build-up for 4.5 years of questions about why he struggled so hard to do very basic things. He was delayed in nearly every single area of his development. Like I say, Katie dismisses so much of his delayed development due to being born premature. He sat late, babbled late, crawled late, walked late, and he was non-verbal until he was 3.5 years old. As he entered preschool, he was challenged to talk to children. He would look at other kids, but he would rarely approach them. If they approached him, he would become stiff and have no idea how to respond. The differences in my mind I had been cataloguing for some time started to add up, and it became this avalanche of differences that tumbled over us every single day. I asked opinions of his occupational therapist, physical therapist, speech language pathologist, and all of them were adamant that he was not autistic. "He's too social," was always the response they gave me in regards to why they believed he was not autistic. He was a very friendly child. They're not going to say that he shows any signs of autism before the age of 3 because you can't diagnose autism until after the age of 3. It was so crucial those years. He could have learned so much. He could have been stimulated so much. But no, Katie was hung over. Her son was a burden. We've seen Toad screen feed B because he doesn't have the patience. I think I might have to reread When I Was on the Verge of Being an Alcoholic because that was the first 4 years of his life. There's the neglect. Katie was working and Toad was working. B was in daycare. Yes, her medically fragile child. Very friendly child. He was interested in people and did say hi to adults and loved to play with adults. However, he was terrified of children his own age because you never socialize. This did not seem to satisfy me. I took quizzes online, read everything on Autism Speaks, and dug through blogs about early signs of autism in children. Over and over, everything I read seemed to be my son. He was repetitive and played with the same toys over and over. Most kids are at that age, though. Most kids become obsessed with one thing. We had to teach him to play with toys. Katie, you were shocked that you had to teach him how to eat. You had to teach him how to walk. You never showed him how to do things. And then, well, he can't do it. He must have some disorder. We had to teach him to play with toys. We had to teach him to inquire about the world. And we had to encourage and prompt him to engage with others. His iPad has been raising him. There's proof of that. Ever since he was 6 months old, Toad has been hung over on the couch, can't parent, no patience. Give that kid the phone, wham bam, thank you ma'am, best parent in the world. He collected diagnoses of sensory processing disorder, motor processing delays, apraxia of speech, oral dysphagia, and finally, oral aversion. Like developmental delays that come from being born premature. I went through all of that. Katie just dismisses all of the premature stuff. He had so many of the very evident flags for autism. Even his developmental pediatrician saw it at age 2. Like I said, you cannot diagnose a child before the age of 3. And even he said he's too social, though. I didn't stop reading or searching for a reason he continued to struggle in such profound ways compared to other children. I wanted to know why he couldn't understand hand gestures, wave high, give knuckles to friends, or blow kisses. When I asked him to look up, I wanted to know why he would turn his entire head up instead of just his eyes. It puzzled me that at night, when I said, "Don't let the bed bugs bite," he would look at me with fear and say, "But where are the bugs?" Katie, that's you. You take everything literally. Plus, I don't believe that you talked about bed bugs. It was always, let's say goodnight to Mama and Papa and Grandma and Grandpa and say that we love Jesus. Everything he did was so literal. It was black and white. We lived in a world where he existed and everyone existed in his world. We never had conversations that were back and forth. He would talk at us about whatever he was interested in, and he rarely asked us questions unless it was a topic that directly affected his schedule or his interest. Are you diagnosing yourself, Katie? That is you. His teachers noted that he had little to no interest in his peers. His Sunday school teacher shared he often stared at children that were crying with absolutely no reaction on his face. His sensory issues controlled our lives. You took him everywhere and you were unable to recognize his body language that was saying, "Get me the fuck out of here, I'm freaking the fuck out." But no, you needed your photos of happy family time at the beach or whatever, You took him everywhere, Katie. For a medically fragile child that was non-verbal and needed to be on a G-tube because he's that unwell and he can't do anything. You took him everywhere. You paraded him around. You loved it until people started asking questions. His sensory issues controlled our lives. Noises were too loud. Textures for pants hurt him. Mushy food made him gag. He hated anything messy touching him. He only ate foods that were orange, and he was constantly seeking ways to crash and fall. No, he wasn't. I have a video where you set up your sensory bin, and he wouldn't perform. Come on, V, show us how you use your crash pad. I'll share it on the internet. When we did go places, we often had to leave early. We left more than a few places after too much noise elicited massive meltdowns with tears, screaming, and hitting. Soon we stopped making playdates with typical peers because he always became too clingy to us, wouldn't interact, and would whine and cry if we left him with children. Our lives became very insulated and isolated by what he would and would not tolerate. He started obsessively collecting cars and trucks. People would tell me every boy loves them. I would say it's the only thing he loves. He showed no interest in other toys. In the beginning, he would line them up in long rows on the floor. And then as he got older, he would categorize the cars by type and color. That's pretty smart for someone with cognitive delayed. He began to read books about trucks and learnt about heavy equipment. His entire life was consumed in cars and vehicles. He wouldn't watch cartoons about anything other than cars or trucks. We once watched the movie Cars 8 times in a weekend. That is just children being children. They become obsessed over one thing. He spun the tires of the wheels of cars obsessively. When he's nervous or agitated, he still spins the wheels. Even though he knows how to play with them more appropriately, I still find lines of cars and cars sorted by colour around the house. That is a load of bulldang. It got to the point where I could no longer ignore all the glaring flags waving in my face. I made an appointment with a neurologist and shared every last concern with her about my child. She was the first doctor that said every single thing he was facing could easily be explained with autism diagnosis. I left with a referral. We were seen over 2 appointments and several hours. The clinic was amazing and the staff was wonderful. I was so scared that after searching for so long that they were going to tell me it wasn't autism. When I finally got the answer, it felt like a weight of 1,000 pounds had lifted off my chest. We are still in the beginning of the journey of understanding how to help him, but knowing what, it finally gives me hope that we can effectively help him. I have a name for all the diagnoses he has collected over the years, and we now have a plan to help him navigate through the world that isn't necessarily built for his mind. It's going to take a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Hashtag cliche for KJ. But I know we will find a way through this diagnosis. I still feel very overwhelmed by the magnitude of this disorder, but I'm also hopeful because there is so much help for children with autism. Therapists and doctors can only provide you information based on their experience treating others with autism. The problem with that is that if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. The spectrum is very wide and each person is affected so differently. Some children will be very friendly and others will not. Some will love to be touched and others will refuse touch of any kind. Some will speak, others will never speak verbally. It's a wide spectrum, and the only way you will ever know is if you get your child tested. If you are reading this and wonder if your child is on the spectrum, I encourage you to contact your child's pediatrician with your concerns. Be very honest about your concerns and press for an evaluation. Advocating for a child is the only way you get answers. Also, being friendly or liking to be touched doesn't mean your child isn't autistic. It just means they manage the deficits differently. Knowledge is power. Isn't it, Katie? And you will use it for your own power. It's pulsing power, and it can be any diagnosis that she comes up with. Ah! Knowledge is power, and early intervention is key for long-term success. Except when you are Katie Joy Paulson and you ignore your son's expanding head size for over 3.5 to 4 years, allowing the ventricles in his brain to build up with cerebral fluid that has caused irreversible destruction. While you're seeking this autism diagnosis, while you're sitting in that waiting room for half an hour before going in and seeing the gods that will decide whether you are telling the truth or not, whether they are going to play along with the Katie Joy story. What if you wrote an article, how I neglected my son and this delayed his cognitive development, his language was delayed, everything was delayed because I didn't bother being a hands-on mum. No, I'm one of those mums that sit back, get drunk, and post what I see in front of me. That's my child, you know? He brings in the money to buy the booze that keeps me happy. Right, Katie? What do you guys think? Please let me know. Comments below. Tag me at Cactus Bill if you have a suggestion for an article. Give this video a like, share it. Please consider subscribing. If you would love to further support this channel, please head to the description box below. Find the Cactus, become a member. They get extra content. They get the Cactus badge. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. And I'll see you next Monday with another article from the Without a Crystal Ball archives. See you guys. Take care.